I wake up one day and I tell the Lord, okay, I'm obviously an abysmal failure at this. And so I'm going to try to do homeschooling the right way. So I take the kids downstairs. It's like I put on my Army Sergeant drill hat and I blew this whistle and I read them these directions and I say, this is what you will do today. This just shows I just didn't know.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I'm Kristi Clover, and I am so excited to be your host for this week. And I have none other than the lovely Zan Tyler on the show today. And we're going to be discussing how not to have a boring homeschool. We are actually going to be talking about how to bring life into your homeschool. So you are going to love it. Do not miss out on this. And first, I want to introduce us to the sponsor of our conversation, which is CTC Math. If you're looking for a math program that truly works, CTC Math has you covered. They offer easy-to-follow video lessons, step-by-step solutions, and interactive practice. With courses from kindergarten to calculus, it's an all-in-one solution for students of all ages. Parents love the progress tracking, and kids enjoy the self-paced learning. Here's a testimonial from Penny in New York. She said, since using CTC Math, my daughter has stopped stressing over math, and I find her actually enjoying it. Thank you so much for all that you've done to help her find success in a subject she hated but now enjoys. Sign up today at ctcmath.com and start your free trial. CTC Math, math made easy. All right, my friends. So I get to bring onto the screen my beautiful friend, Zan Tyler. Now, Zan and I have actually been friends. I calculated it out for almost 10 years now.
Oh, man.
I know. Isn't that amazing? I did the math. I was like, Zan and I met at that one blogging conference, and I was like timing it out to when everything hit. And I was like, oh, it's been 10 years. So
hard to believe.
Forever. So fun. Well, I can give all these like wonderful examples. I mean, you're a homeschool pioneer. You're an advocate for homeschool freedom. You do speaking and writing, and you work at BJU. But how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what makes you tick? That's a deeper conversation.
Yes, really. Probably the most important thing to tell you about myself is that I homeschooled my kids for 21 years. And, homeschooling is the most glorious thing I think you can do when you love your kids. It's the hardest thing. There's nothing easy about it, but it is glorious. So that would be the first thing I would say is that we had, I just loved my kids. I loved that time with them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as time goes on. Joe and I have been married for many, many years. My husband is my best friend and sort of my partner in crime with all of this. And now that, we finished homeschooling we started in 1984 when I was threatened with jail. And then we finished in 2005. And so I have been involved for another 20 years, really, in the homeschooling movement. And I would probably have to say I'm more committed to homeschooling now more than ever, because when you're in the middle of homeschooling, you're in the throes of it. It's hard to see the bigger picture sometimes of the fabulous things that are happening with your kids educationally or spiritually or socially, all of those things. And you don't have time for a lot of reflection. But now that I'm away from being in the trenches every day, I can reflect a lot more, and I can watch you and your family and other homeschool moms and just see, for lack of a better word, the magic that happens in your home when you're homeschooling.
Oh, well, I think everybody needs a Zan in their life, because you always are like, you're doing great. You're doing amazing. I'm like, okay, I can do it because Zan told me to. Oh, well, if anyone can, again, you're talking about reflection, and I think that's so great because I really do want to talk about, yes, don't have a boring homeschool. Yes, it's okay for kids to be bored, but we don't necessarily want homeschooling to be boring. But really the bigger picture is how to create a life-giving home. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about that today, because I think people get so wrapped up in the checklists. There might be gaps if I take a break. What do I have to do? What can I, push back on? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today. And so figured we could kick it off with maybe just talking about those gaps. Because when we think about creating a more life-giving home that sometimes, or homeschool, it often means that we have to allow gaps. So can you kind of talk about, what are some of your advice for what to let go of and what to hold on to?
Sure. And at one point, we'll talk about, I think, the two most important days in my life in terms of gaining freedom in our homeschool, to not worry about gaps, to not worry about those things. And I'm not talking about constitutional freedom to homeschool. I'm talking about the freedom to really enjoy our kids. But I will never forget sitting in my first college class. I went to Furman University. It was a very academic college. And I had gone to an excellent high school and graduated near the top of my class with 650 kids. And I remember sitting in that classroom and thinking, nobody prepared me for this. And I thought I had studied hard, I had worked hard. And so I just think gaps are a part of life. There is no school teacher who can teach a child, a fourth grader, everything they need to know. There's no English teacher that can teach a child everything they need to know. And so I think as homeschool moms, we have these things that cause us to lose sleep at night, and gaps is one of them. I can remember when we started homeschooling, people would say, is it legal? What about socialization? What about the prom? And what about physics? And I'm saying, hey, they're 6 and 4. Can you give me a little bit of a break here?
Yes.
And you do it bit by bit and bite by bite. And it's amazing. But I would tell parents, don't worry about the gaps. I remember one time I was really worried about the things my kids weren't learning in science. And so I hired a tutor. And this tutor went through this 6th grade science book with the boys for 6 weeks, covered the whole science book. And the funny thing was, he said, Mrs. Tyler, do you teach your boys the same thing? I said, I do. He said, do you use the same book? I said, I do. And he said, you would never know they've been sitting in the same classroom from what the two of them know and don't know. And, it was just a difference in the way they learn, a difference in what they're interested in. And I needed for him to say that to me. And so, with homeschooling, it's kind of easy to pick up the gaps. The thing we don't want gaps in, we don't want gaps in our kids' faith. And we don't want gaps in their joy. We don't want gaps in their relationships. Not that all of those things are going to be perfect in your home. I don't mean that. But as homeschooling moms, we get to focus on those things. We get to focus on their faith. We get to focus on our relationship with them, their ability to serve others, what they're interested in. And so I think when you have that type of life-giving home, a gap in science or history or grammar is really pretty easy to fill. Okay, so here's my favorite story, and then I'm going to let you talk.
I'm good.
So, by the time my daughter had gone to college, I'd written 2 books, and I had worked for a publisher some because she was in high school and very independent, and we'd sit there and do our work together. And grammar was so important to me. Editing was so important to me, although there's a lot more to writing than editing. I could not get this child interested in grammar to save her life. Now, she had won money for creative essays and recipes and all these very personable. She had been Annie. But did she want to know the mechanics of grammar? No. So she goes to college. She's majoring in media communications. And she has this professor who says, if you learn how to edit, you'll always have a job. If you have little kids or big kids or just want something extra on the side, you'll always have a job. So in one semester, she learned everything she needed to know about being a professional editor. And, that was an obvious gap. And I tried to fill it to no avail. Then she goes to college and has one teacher who totally fills the gap in less than a semester. And she's used that as a skill ever since she's been in college and out of college. So.
Oh my goodness. I love it. No, because it is almost funny that, to our best, like when other people say things, they're like light bulb, and you're like, but I was saying that for all these cares? Like,
yes.
Listen to me.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. You can say it sometimes 1,000 times. But I really do feel like that's just firewood that the Holy Spirit lays up in their heart.
Yeah.
And so when the right person comes along or the right idea or the right circumstance, they the Holy Spirit just lights a little fire in their heart and gets that flame blazing too.
I love it. And I think that's what we ultimately need to think about too, is that number one, I have gaps in my education. I wasn't homeschooled. I have gaps in all kinds of things. And if it's interesting, I fill the gap. As an adult, I choose to fill the gap.
That's right.
Yeah. And the big thing, like number two, I guess, would be that we know the ultimate gap filler. So if it's something they need to know and that's important for them to have going forward in life, God knows. And he's going to bring about, if you forget, it's okay. He doesn't. And he will bring about the right people to speak into our kids, the right circumstances, the right motivation.
Yes.
Sometimes that's the bigger issue, is that they're just like, it's not fun. Like, I always hear stories about people talking about how, their daughter decided to go into this major, like, but you don't like math. And then, but suddenly math has meaning. And so then they focus. And like you said with grammar, same thing. It's like when it has a different purpose, then the motivation changes.
That's right. I think about my two sons, and my middle son wanted to be a doctor. And Ty, we either knew he was going to be a salesman or a preacher. Whatever he did, he was going to make his living with his mouth and his personality, And so science really, we knew that they were both college bound. That's not the case for everybody, but with what they wanted to do, I knew they needed it. At this point, they needed a college. At that point in their lives, they needed a college education. And so they had done their 4 years of science. And I probably had emphasized it more with John than with Ty, because John loved science. He wanted to be a doctor. Ty was not. He just didn't care that much about math or science. Great speaker, great in the language arts. And so as it turns out, John goes to law school, and Ty was a medical device salesman and had to go up to Boston and take this course that all these doctors have to take to pass medical school to be this. And then I looked at Ty and I said, I guess I just didn't pay you enough when you were in high school.
Right. Because that's the ultimate motivator for homeschool. Do your work and I'll give you $1. We don't go broke.
That's not exactly what I meant.
I'll give you $1 and it will go towards food.
So, but he had a family, and now, so this is meaning something to him.
Yeah.
And he had an aptitude too. So it's funny how your kids grow, and what they're interested in today is not what they'll be interested in 10 years. But I still think there's great freedom and power in letting them pursue their interests and letting them, just experience life, because they are going to get it when they need it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, the other thing because I think we listen to the lie, like kind of what's kind of can lead to a boring homeschool is when we're just following that checklist and just getting things done, and we keep it all about that. And so we're afraid of gaps, and we're afraid of falling behind. But what are some ways to speak into that parent who is afraid that being creative and taking field trips, because that means a day without getting things done. So how would you speak into that, just to kind of encourage a mom?
So I'm going to go back, because this is what we do when we talk, Kristi. I'm going to go back and give you the background of why I think this. And it was because the first year we homeschooled, there was this crazy law that said that I had to use a curriculum that a public or private school in my district was using. I wasn't free to choose. But there was a Christian school, and there was a curriculum that I could use. So unsuited for my son, Ty. It was unbelievable. Doesn't mean it was bad. It just was not right for him. But I was stuck. And every morning I would read something like this in the teacher's manual. Now, this is just kindergarten or grade 1. And it's have your kids sit with your feet on their desk and their feet on the floor and their hands on the desk, and look you in the eye and raise up your hand. There was no curriculum for homeschoolers then. It's all classroom curriculum. And so we never had a day like that. Ty was not that type of kid who was going to sit there and do that. So I just remember I had been homeschooling. I didn't know anybody in the world who was homeschooling when we started. So we'd been homeschooling for about 6 months. And so now it's like February or March. And I wake up one day and I tell the Lord, okay, I'm obviously an abysmal failure at this. And so I'm going to try to do homeschooling the right way. So I take the kids downstairs. It's like I put on my Army Sergeant drill hat and I blew this whistle and I read them these directions and I say, this is what you will do today. And you are going to be still and Ty. You're going to raise your hand when you have something to say. You're not going to interrupt me. You're not going to color while I'm talking. You're not going to play with your cards. And for heaven's sakes, you're not going to bounce that ball that's always going over here. And so, this just shows I just didn't know. And so it was so miserable. Now, John, my 4-year-old, just had this amazing gift of concentration, even at 4. But Ty was upset. I mean, Ty never said 2 words. Ty talked all day long and we enjoyed being together, not engaged at all. John, the 4-year-old, was a mess because his brother was a mess. He just wanted everybody to be happy. And so I said, okay, Lord, if this is homeschooling, I can't do it and I need to quit. And I know there are people out there that feel that way. And so about a week or so later, I went to this little toy store to buy a birthday present for the kids. And they had the Brio train set, where they can play because we couldn't afford one. And I started reading this book. They had this great book nook called Growing Up Learning. And he said, and for most of your audience, this is old news, but for me, this was Independence Day. He said, your kids learn in one of 3 ways: auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. They learn by seeing, hearing, and talking, or moving and doing. And he said, woe to the auditory kinesthetic kid who learns by talking and moving, because those are unacceptable activities in a classroom. Now, this is not a homeschool person at all. He said, if you can get them out of school, they make the biggest, usually the biggest successes in life. And then he just talked about the class. He talked about this graduate student. And he said she spent all of her time when she had to be still and focused in a classroom, she said it took all of her energy because she was auditory kinesthetic. And if she could move and talk, she could learn. But if she had to be still, all of her focus was going into being still and quiet, and she couldn't learn anything. Wow. And I'm having these ding, 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 ding moments and the sirens going off. And I'm thinking, Lord, you made Ty. You made him an auditory kinesthetic learner. You made him to learn by moving and talking. And that explains why he couldn't say 2 words to me the day I made him sit still and quiet. And so really, I call that Independence Day in our homeschool, because Ty was free to be who God made him to be, not who I made him to be. But I had felt so much guilt for that because I felt like it was my fault. Now, I'm not saying a child never needs to sit still and be quiet. So hear me, I'm not saying that. But that is not how Ty learned on a daily basis. And that was the beauty of homeschooling for him.
Oh, I agree, because that was such a big thing. I probably heard that from you at a homeschool convention I went to when I was first starting out. But I remember, because my 2 older boys, we did a full year of kindergarten in public school and pulled out my kindergartner and first grader at that point from public school about 8 weeks in. And that first, I remember, because Grant, my oldest, was thriving in school, but he was so far ahead in some areas, he was bored. And so I was noticing he was starting to not focus on stuff because he was so bored. They're well, we can bump him up to be with the 3rd and 4th graders. I'm like, yeah, no, that doesn't sound like a great idea. And then with Blake, because Blake is a kinesthetic learner. And so that was really difficult. He's a visual kinesthetic learner. So being talked at did not help him. And I remember sitting in the classroom and just watching one kid after another just lose focus. And you got these little kindergartners in there. And I remember that was about the time that Steve was traveling, and I called him. I'm like, I think we need to pull the kids out of school and start homeschooling them, because this is not. You could just tell this is not what they're
working.
Meant to do.
Yes.
So crazy. Well, I can't wait to jump into more details, but first we're going to take a quick break to hear from another sponsor.
Join Apologia for the Homeschool Bootcamp, a free video series that provides practical guidance and wisdom from experienced homeschool parents. You'll discover how to equip your family for academic, social, and spiritual success. Plus, you'll discover how to build deeper and stronger family relationships. Homeschool Bootcamp covers how to break free from the public school mindset, daily planning, supporting students with learning challenges, homeschooling as a working parent, navigating the high school years, and much more. Find this incredible free homeschool resource at apologia.com/bootcamp.
Homeschooling is a big responsibility. With BJU Press, you can feel equipped to give your children not just an education, but a foundation for life. Children learn in different ways, and BJU Press lets you adapt to their unique learning styles. And you'll love the community of other homeschool moms who use BJU Press. They've been where you are, and they're full of advice, encouragement, and practical tips. And when you need even more help, there's the Homeschool Hub, which keeps families organized with easy lesson planning, calendars, and even grading tools. To learn more, visit bjupresshomeschool.com.
We are back with my guest, Zan Tyler, and we are talking about how to not have a boring homeschool. And so we've been talking about, looking for gaps and letting go of the fact that we're just going to have gaps. It's okay to fall behind. It's just to kind of get away from feeling like we have to have a lot of structure and learning to be more flexible. But Zan, I want to kind of get into how can we add some more fun and just bring more life into our homeschool? So what are some tips from you about just ways to have more fun in our homeschooling?
I read the most interesting book one time, and it was called The Brilliant Idiot. And it was by a man with his PhD in education. Wow. And he just talked about growing up in a primitive church environment in Canada and being beaten when he couldn't learn things.
My goodness.
And I think it was mainly on the hands, but it was pretty severe. So his whole goal was to encourage people in their learning. But the one takeaway from the book was this. He said, some days I wake up and I know that nothing academic is going to happen today. So I have a list of things I need to accomplish that might not be book work, because he was an academic at this point. And then I thought, as a homeschooling mom, wow, because there are some days you wake up and everything you have planned for that day just isn't going to work. I mean, you're intuitive about your home and the mood, and when kids need a break, or, you've been pushing hard through one subject and maybe you just need a little bit of time off. I would just know. So there's some mornings I woke up and knew we've got to get out of the house. We've got to go do something meaningful, but get out. And so, I love field trips for that reason. And one thing I wish I had known to do that I would encourage moms to do, interview each one of your children and ask them these questions. If you could go anywhere on a field trip, where would it be? If you could visit any location, where would it be? If you could visit any person, who would that be? And if you could study any one topic, what would that be?
Oh my goodness.
So when you interview your kids, you have those things written down. You wake up and okay, we're not going to get any math done today, even if we sit there with the math book open for 40 minutes. And so then you've got this list of things to draw from. For my kids, we were 2.5 hours from the beach and 2.5 hours from the mountains. And that would be a pretty extreme field trip for the day. But we've been known to just take off and go do that,
Yes.
And, but if you've got a list of field trips, the State House, we took a few too many field trips to the State House, but it was still a break from the normal routine. And I think sometimes as long as your kids know they're not, that school is not a prison, it's a lifelong learning situation, then I think it's great. And sometimes you just surprise them with that break, or, everybody's fussing. Sometimes you need a change of scenery. Instead of just just harping on them all the time, which your kids need to get. I mean, hear me out here. But sometimes you just need to change the scenery. Sometimes I just need to change the scenery. So go outside and do your schoolwork, or go out, as our dear friend Jenny Yurt says, go outside for 1,000 hours.
I love it. Yes.
But there's something about, we've gone outside and just done our work, or we've gone outside. I love what George Washington Carver says, that nature is God's broadcasting system, where he shows you the glories of the universe and takes you beyond yourself. So there is something about being outside, and each of your kids will have different things that they like doing. And so if you've written all that down, you wake up that morning and you think, okay, Johnny, what if you could pick one thing out of this list to do today? What would it be? And you've got this curated list, and you just go do something you're interacting with people, you're out of the house, you're learning something. I don't know. I just think that's one of the glories of homeschooling.
Oh, I love it. And honestly, Mom, this is a friend to friend thing. I am just so impressed you had a list. I know you and I joke about that.
Because I don't do lists. Most people love lists.
You said lists, and I'm like, wait a minute. No, I'm talking to Zan.
Let me just say this. I have lots of goals. I just don't like lists. I think it's when I had the Myers-Briggs, when our friend Lanisser did the Myers-Briggs on me, I never can remember what I am. I think it's an ENTJ or something.
I forget all the time too.
Or something. But the one thing it says is, you need to know this about yourself. You don't like to do the same thing 2 days in a row, which makes it hard to be a really consistent homeschool mom,
Yeah.
So I had to work at that, but it was that desire to get out and let the world be your classroom.
Yeah.
And I have to say this too. I like curriculum. A lot of people hate curriculum. I like it. I love reading through it. I love books, but I loved getting out too. I think it's important for our kids to see as much of life as you can expose them to.
Oh, absolutely. No, in fact, when people are like, but what do I do? It's really hard. I'm like, it's time for our field trip. It is time to get outside. Tell your kids to go to the park and do school. Just get out of the normal rhythm.
Yes, I agree with that.
My goodness.
And you obviously can't do this every day. I'm not saying never teach your kids anything, So
some people do. There is the whole unschooling side of things, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, and I do think most of the people who say they unschool are looking at the interest of their kids and letting that direct them. So I just think that's a different approach to schooling. That's not truant schooling. You know what I'm saying? We got laws on the book about not educating your kids. But so I just, I loved that about homeschooling. I loved that, the kids, I know sometimes sports gets a bum rap in homeschooling, but my kids loved sports, and it was a real springboard for ministry for them. Both of them had played on pretty competitive soccer teams, and they were counselors at an FCA camp one year. And then one year, a pastor in Columbia, who was not our pastor, asked my son John to put together a soccer team to take over to the UK to use as an evangelistic outreach tool. And so, so I think all of our kids' interest can be used as a springboard for ministry and service, as a springboard to be who God created them to be. Eric Liddell said when he won the Olympic gold, if you've ever watched Chariots of Fire, if you haven't, you watch that with your kids. He said, God made me to serve the people in China, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. So what is it that your kids do that when they do that thing, they feel God's pleasure? That's what we're after in life. That C.S. Lewis calls it the signature of the soul. Every child has his own or her own signature of the soul that makes them unique and different. God made each one of us uniquely and different in his image. And, it's a glorious way to be created.
It is. And you're kind of like teasing for next week when we are going to be diving into an episode all about how to find strengths, how to identify strengths in our kids, how to, help build those strengths in our kids. But Zan, this is it for this part of the show. And I just want to ask, where can people find you? What are any resources that you want to share while you're on here?
Well, the people can find me at zantyler.com. And I've got a podcast, the Zan Tyler podcast, Thriving in Your Homeschool. Yeah. And you can find that on my website or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And then I'm on social media. And so they can find me there.
Oh, perfect. And I want to make sure to tell our audience all about heading over to schoolhouserocked.com. So schoolhouserocked.com, and you can stream the Schoolhouse Rocked movie there. They have other resources for you to find out or to find there as well. Make sure that you guys are subscribing to the YouTube channel. If you are not watching this and you're just listening to us, know that you can actually watch us laugh and everything right over there on YouTube. But make sure that you are subscribing so you can see all the ways that Schoolhouse Rocked has been able to bless their audience. And if you are interested in any of my resources, you can find that at KristiClover.com. That's Kristi, KristiClover.com. And if you go to KristiClover.com/sanity, you can get a free copy of my Sanity Savers for Moms book. So it's just a little resource I have for you as well. But thank you so much for joining us here on the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I look forward to listening to you. We're going to have Zan back on talking about identifying and cultivating our strengths in our kids. So thanks so much for listening in, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. And be sure to listen to the end, because we're going to do a little teaser for you here at the end of the podcast. So take care and have a great rest of your week.
You're listening to the Biblical Family Network.
Hey, I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And we're the co-hosts of the Culture Proof podcast. We want to invite you to join us every week as we discuss what's happening in the world and then filter those happenings through a decidedly biblical lens.
There are many questions, especially when we see what's happening in our culture today, but the answers are found within the Word of God. So that's where we want to look.
Amen. When we resist those cultural trends that rival the truth,
we remain culture proof.
I think we forget as parents sometimes, because we're like, homeschool, get things done, take care of the house, make dinner, all of the to-dos we do as parents.
Yes.
And we forget that we have this glorious ministry right in front of us.
As we are living our lives and doing the things God has called us to as parents and families, we're discipling our kids, and it looks different for each one of them. They each have different spiritual gifts. They each have different callings on their lives. Our kids weren't born as a blank slate. God created each one of them with gifts and learning styles and personality and bent. And if we fold them the way they're bent, it's a great way to breathe life into your homeschool and also minimize conflict.